From the outside, they looked like the kind of family people envied. A tidy home with trimmed hedges and fresh white shutters. Two well-behaved children who smiled at Sunday service. And a couple, Emma and Mark, always seated in the front pew, holding hands as the pastor preached. They were the picture of Christian devotion. He, a respected leader in the church. She, a loving wife and mother who led the women's Bible study every Thursday. But pictures lie. Behind closed doors, there were no prayers whispered together at bedtime, no laughter at the dinner table, just silence. Heavy, unforgiving silence. Emma smiled for the congregation, but inside, she was fading. Each day, she followed the motions. Wake the children, pack their lunches, clean the house, pretend everything was fine. But something was missing. Something deep. Not just romance, not just passion. It was recognition. She longed to be seen. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a servant of God, but as a woman. Mark, though faithful in Scripture, had grown distant in spirit. He was a man of discipline, of principle, of image, but not of intimacy. Their conversations had dwindled into updates. Bills, chores, schedules. The warmth had gone. The connection had died, quietly, respectfully, like everything in their life. And Emma? She began to wonder if this was all God intended for her. A life of duty, of spiritual obedience and emotional starvation. Then, Ahmed moved in next door. A polite wave, a kind word over the fence, a gentle smile that lingered just a little too long. Harmless, at first, but the most dangerous storms always begin with a quiet breeze. And in the stillness of suburbia, a spark was lit. One that would burn through marriages, faith, and a man's life. Emma once believed that love grew stronger with time. That the quiet nights, the folded laundry, the packed lunches, all of it meant something. That devotion, even without words, was still devotion. But years passed, and what she got in return for her loyalty was absence. Mark wasn't cruel. He wasn't violent. He was, in many ways, a good man. He paid the bills. He showed up to church. He never raised his voice. But that's the thing about emotional abandonment. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And it disappears. Emma spent her days inside 4 beige walls, cooking meals that went unappreciated, folding clothes he never noticed, waiting in silence for a man who stopped seeing her long ago. Their love had become routine, predictable, cold, like the polite nods they gave each other in passing. They still prayed together, but never really spoke. And somewhere along the way, Emma stopped believing she was worthy of more. She poured herself into her children, Sarah, now 12, and David, only 8. She drove them to school, read them bedtime stories, helped them memorize Sunday verses. But even the joy of motherhood began to fade under the weight of her invisibility. She tried to fill the void with service, church committees, fundraisers, women's fellowship every Thursday. But those were masks, worn to convince herself that she still mattered. In truth, she was slowly withering, not from neglect, but from being forgotten. And every night, after the children had gone to bed, she would sit by the window, staring at the darkened street, watching porch lights flicker across the neighborhood, and wondering, is this it? Is this all there is to a good Christian life? She had prayed for warmth, for meaning, for someone to look at her like she still existed. She never expected that answer to come from the man next door. But when it did, she didn't look away. He moved in quietly. No big trucks, no noisy chaos, just a man, his wife, and their infant son. unpacking a new life in the house next door. Ahmed was different. He wasn't loud or overly friendly, but he was present, in a way Mark hadn't been in years. When Emma first saw him, he was carrying groceries in one hand, cradling his sleeping son in the other. She noticed the care in his movements, the patience in his face, the softness in his eyes. It wasn't attraction. Not then. It was recognition of something human, of something alive. Their first conversations were brief. Neighborhood gossip, trash pickup schedules, weather, safe topics, harmless smiles. But over time, those small exchanges became moments Emma looked forward to. Little bursts of warmth in her otherwise cold routine. Ahmed would laugh, really laugh, when she joked. He listened, not out of obligation, but with intent. He noticed the color of her dress. He remembered her favorite tea. It had been years since anyone had asked Emma how she was, and actually waited for the answer. And Ahmed? He was quietly drowning in his own world of silence. His wife, Aisha, had fallen into a deep postpartum depression. She barely spoke. She barely left the house. Their once loving home had become a place of stillness and sorrow. Ahmed, like Emma, had no one to talk to, no one to lean on, until her. He didn't see her as the Christian wife next door. He saw her, the woman behind the smiles, the woman who needed to be seen. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not between them, not across that religious divide, not within a neighborhood built on routine, family values, and appearances. But sometimes, what's forbidden doesn't whisper, it roars. Emma began looking for reasons to linger at the mailbox. Ahmed started watering his plants a little later than usual. A glance turned into a conversation into connection, and connection became temptation. They hadn't touched, not yet, but emotional intimacy has its own kind of gravity, and they were falling, slowly, quietly, fatally. Neither of them realized it yet, but the door had already opened, and neither of them would walk out of it whole. It started on a rainy Thursday. Emma had just come back from church, her umbrella broken, her shoes soaked. The kids were at her mother's. Mark was away on another overnight retreat with the church elders. She walked past Ahmed's front porch, soaked, shivering, when his door opened. "Emma, you okay?" She hesitated, and that's all it took. He invited her in, just for a moment, just to dry off. The room was warm, the lights low. A kettle whistled on the stove. Soft Quranic music played from the next room, almost like a heartbeat. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, not touching, not yet. They talked about the weather, about the kids, about loneliness, about how their homes, once filled with life, now felt like silent prisons. And then, a pause. The kind of silence that only comes when the air shifts, when two people both know something is about to happen, but neither wants to be the one to make it real. Ahmed reached for her hand. Emma didn't pull away. And that was it. The line, the one they had both danced around for months, was gone. That night, nothing graphic happened. No clothes came off. But everything changed. Because once the soul crosses a line, the body follows. In the weeks that followed, the conversations became longer, the glances more daring, the excuses more frequent. She found herself applying lipstick before checking the mail. He started shaving more often, both of them smiling at little nothings, smiles only they understood. The guilt was real, but it was no match for the pull, the intoxicating high of being seen, wanted, heard. Emma started skipping women's prayer group. Ahmed began working from home more. And then, one night, Aisha left town to visit family. The kids were asleep. Emma walked next door. He met her at the door, wordless, the tension between them thick as thunderclouds. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her. That night, they stopped pretending. No more boundaries, no more self-restraint. Only two people, starving for affection, finally feeding the hunger they had denied too long. But here's the thing about desire. It never ends where you expect it to. What felt like love was the beginning of destruction. And by the time they realized it, someone would be dead. Every Sunday, Emma sat in the front pew, her Bible in hand, her eyes closed during prayer, her voice steady as she led the hymns. She was the portrait of virtue, the devoted wife, the model mother, the faithful Christian woman every other woman in the congregation admired or envied. But no one saw what happened after dark, because by night, Emma slipped out of that role like a coat that no longer fit. And in its place, she wore something else: desire, defiance, and deceit. She and Ahmed had mastered the art of secrecy. Quick glances across backyard fences, coded texts disguised as reminders about neighborhood trash pickup, and quiet footsteps. Always after the children were asleep. Always when Aisha was gone. Emma's Bible still lay by her bedside, but it hadn't been opened in weeks. She told herself she'd pray later, that God would understand, that this wasn't really sin, just a mistake she hadn't figured out how to fix yet. But even she knew that was a lie. Every time she left Ahmed's house, she'd look up at the stars and feel smaller than she ever had. Guilty, ashamed, but also alive. Because for the first time in years, someone touched her like she mattered, listened like she had a mind, held her like she was more than just a background figure in a man's spiritual journey. And Ahmed? He had begun to change too. No longer the composed, soft-spoken neighbor, he became impulsive, forgetful. His wife, Aisha, started noticing the cracks, late nights, slipped details, cold avoidance in bed. The faith he once wore so naturally now weighed like a noose. And yet, he couldn't stop. Not from seeing Emma, not from needing her. Because Emma was no longer just a neighbor. She was his escape, his addiction. And the more their lives unraveled behind closed doors, the more perfectly they smiled in public. At church picnics, at school drop-offs, at neighborhood watch meetings. They had become experts in deception, masters of the mask. But masks crack, and secrets rot from the inside out. They thought they could control it, that they could balance devotion and betrayal. But dual lives don't last long, and this one was about to implode. They thought they were invisible. Two lovers hidden in the routine of suburban life. But even the best lies leave a scent. Mark noticed it first, not in something obvious, like a lipstick stain or a strange number on a bill. It was in the absence. The way Emma stopped humming while folding laundry. The way she answered his questions with delayed half-smiles. The way she seemed far away, even while sitting across from him at dinner. He prayed about it. Of course he did. He thought it was stress, church responsibilities, motherhood fatigue. But Mark wasn't a fool, and Emma, for all her practiced poise, had never been good at pretending. She came home late, offered vague excuses, sometimes smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't his. He didn't say anything, not yet, because Mark was a man of order, of structure, of certainty. He would wait, watch, gather. And he wasn't the only one growing suspicious. Across the fence, In a house that once echoed with lullabies and late-night prayers, Aisha was crumbling. She had spent months trapped in the fog of postpartum depression. Barely noticing Ahmed's late returns, his sudden distance, his silence in bed. But depression doesn't blind you forever. Eventually, you open your eyes, and what Aisha saw terrified her. Her husband, once gentle and dependable, now flinched at her touch. He stared at his phone too long. He spoke of Emma too fondly, in casual, offhand mentions that felt rehearsed. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Aisha found something in Ahmed's jeans pocket. A note, handwritten, brief, no name, just tomorrow, after 9, same place. Her hands trembled. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Because like Mark, she needed to be sure. She needed proof, not just suspicion. But both spouses, once blind in routine, had now opened their eyes. The tension grew like static in the air. Unspoken. Undeniable. Emma couldn't sleep. Ahmed couldn't focus. Their stolen moments now came with the bitter taste of fear. The thrill was fading. The lies were stacking. They were no longer just sneaking around. They were being hunted. And in the shadows of two crumbling marriages, something far more dangerous was taking root. Rage. March 3rd, 2012. Atlanta was drenched in rain. Lightning lit up the sky like a warning. But the real storm was waiting inside the walls of Emma's home. She had planned everything. Mark was supposed to be out of town. Another church retreat. Another weekend of holy silence. The kids were with her mother. The night was hers and his. Ahmed parked 3 houses down. Umbrella low. Hoodie pulled tight. No one saw him slip through the side gate. No one saw the front light dim. Just 2 people chasing the only thing that made them feel alive. They kissed in the kitchen, hurried, desperate. Emma's hands trembled as she poured tea she didn't intend to drink. Ahmed leaned against the counter, watching her like she was the only real thing in his world. And then, a sound. Keys in the door. At first, Emma thought it was thunder, but the soft creak of the doorknob silenced everything. Mark had come home early. No warning, no phone call, just instinct. A voice in his gut that said, "Go home." Now, and there he was, standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain, Bible in one hand, seeing his wife, the woman he had prayed for, forgiven, led in faith, wrapped in another man's arms. For a split second, no one moved. Time didn't slow down. It shattered. Mark dropped the Bible. His face was stone, but his eyes burned. "Get out!" He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He moved with purpose. Toward the counter, toward the knife. Emma shouted. Ahmed stepped forward. And then, chaos. Chairs overturned. Shouts. A blur of limbs in a narrow kitchen. Mark lunged. Ahmed grabbed his wrist. The knife clattered. Emma tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. Then, a flash of metal. A gasp. Silence. Mark staggered back, 2 red stains blooming across his white shirt. He collapsed onto the floor. His last breath barely a whisper. The rain still fell outside. But inside, everything was still. Emma dropped to her knees. Ahmed stared at his hands. The blood, the blade, the horror. Neither of them meant for this to happen. But they had been building toward it for months. Every lie, every kiss, every night of stolen time, all of it led here. And now, there was no going back. The knife hit the floor with a cold clatter. Mark's body didn't move. His blood pooled around him, quiet, thick, final. For a moment, Emma and Ahmed just stood there, frozen, breathing, breaking. The only sound was the steady tick of the kitchen clock. counting down the seconds since everything became unforgivable. Emma dropped beside Mark, her hands trembling as she touched his face. Still warm. She whispered his name. Once. Twice. But he was gone. Ahmed stood motionless. Like if he didn't blink, this wouldn't be real. But it was real. Too real. And reality meant consequences. "You have to go," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible through the storm in her chest. "Now." Ahmed hesitated. His hands, still wet with blood, hovered in the air like they didn't belong to him. He backed away, stepping over the fallen Bible, over the broken life they'd created, and disappeared into the night. Emma was alone now, and she had a decision to make. She cleaned, as best she could, wiped the counters, changed her dress, opened the window, as if fresh air could erase what had just happened. When the police arrived the next morning, tipped off by an anonymous 911 call from a neighbor who heard something, Emma played her part. She was the grieving wife, in shock, alone with her children, now motherless in every sense that mattered. She told them it must have been a break-in, a robbery gone wrong. She recited the story like a prayer. She had come home and found Mark already on the floor. No idea who did it. Just horror. But lies are slippery, and blood has a memory. The detectives noticed inconsistencies. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. Only a life. Taken violently. And Ahmed? He was nowhere to be found. His wife Aisha reported him missing 2 days later. His phone, off. His car, abandoned in a motel parking lot 3 counties away. But inside that car, they found a torn scrap of paper. Emma's handwriting. No one can ever know. The case had begun, and so had the unraveling. The trial began on May 15, 2013. But the judgment had started long before the gavel hit the bench. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, church members, neighbors who once waved politely from across the street now whispered behind hands. Emma sat quietly at the defendant's table. The same hands that once folded in prayer, now clasped together in chains of shame. Next to her, Ahmed, hollow-eyed, gaunt. The man who had once made her feel alive, now barely breathing beneath the weight of what they'd done. The prosecution didn't just present evidence. They built a story, a narrative of lust, betrayal, and blood. They spoke of Emma, the faithful Christian wife, who became a liar, an adulterer, and an accomplice to murder. They spoke of Ahmed, a man torn between cultures, convictions, and carnal desire, who let temptation override every value he once held sacred. They laid out the affair in chilling detail: the late-night meetings, the carefully timed rendezvous, the coded messages. They showed the kitchen knife, Mark's autopsy photos, Emma's texts, Ahmed's fingerprints. But what they really put on trial was faith. How could a woman who led Sunday school live a life of such deception? How could a man who spoke of honor and prayer end up drenched in his neighbor's blood? Emma wept. Not loud sobs, but the silent kind. The kind that drip like guilt onto the cold floor beneath you. She admitted the affair, admitted the lies. But she denied knowing what would happen that night. She said she never meant for it to go that far. That Mark's death was an accident. Ahmed claimed self-defense. That Mark had attacked him first. That it had all happened so fast. But the jury didn't buy it. Not after hearing from Aisha. Not after reading Emma's letter. The one they found in Ahmed's car. No one can ever know. 8 words. That said everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it only took the jury 6 hours. Ahmed, guilty of manslaughter, 25 years, no parole. Emma, guilty of obstruction, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. 15 years. Tears couldn't save her. And when the verdict was read, no one cheered. Because this wasn't victory. It was ruin. Of a marriage. Of a family. Of faith. When the prison doors closed behind Emma and Ahmed, the story didn't end. It lingered. In the quiet halls of the church, where Mark once led Sunday prayers. In the corner house on Willow Street, where the blinds stay shut now, even in daylight. In the eyes of two children, who would never again call their father Dad, or feel their mother's arms without thinking of betrayal. Sarah was 14 when the world collapsed, old enough to understand what a trial meant, old enough to read the headlines, "Devout Christian wife guilty in husband's death." She changed schools twice, stopped going to youth group, stopped believing anyone, including God, could hear her anymore. David was 10. He just knew Mom was gone, and Dad wasn't coming back. They now live with Emma's sister, out of state. A home full of silence, of broken routines, of questions that may never find answers. Across town, Aisha packed up what little dignity she had left and vanished. She took their son, barely old enough to form memories, and moved 3 states away. Ahmed's name was erased from their life like chalk on a wet board. But some things don't erase, not really. Behind bars, he writes letters no one answers. Letters to his son, to Aisha, to God. Emma writes too. Long pages of scripture, of apologies, of the life she used to dream of. But redemption can't undo murder. And prayers whispered through prison bars sound very different than the ones whispered from pews. Mark's grave sits beneath an old oak tree, the kind of place that once would have felt peaceful. Now, it just feels unfinished. Because in this story, the dead aren't the only ones buried. Faith was buried. Trust was buried. Love, too, crushed beneath the weight of desire, denial, and desperation. And the ghost that haunts this tale isn't just Mark. It's the echo of a question. How did it go this far? It started with kindness, with glances, with the need to feel wanted again. But it ended in blood, in chains, in children left holding the cost of adult choices. So, if you take anything from this story, let it be this. No affair stays secret. No sin stays silent. And the moment you say, "It's just one time," is the moment the cracks begin. Sometimes, you lose everything before you even realize you're falling.